We don't serve window shoppers here." The words cut through the air like glass shattering on marble, sharp, humiliating, impossible to ignore. Jamal Thompson, founder and CEO of Lumina Jewelry, stood frozen. This was his empire, the brand he had built from nothing into a crown worn by the elite. But today, he wasn't here as the owner. Dressed in a plain hoodie and worn jeans, Jamal blended into the Saturday morning crowd. Outside, his loyal black Labrador Shadow waited patiently, leash looped around a lamp post. Just an hour earlier, he'd been in his modest kitchen sipping coffee in the soft morning light. The quiet felt like a reward after decades of hard work. But that quiet was pierced by a purpose. Whispers of poor customer treatment in his flagship store had reached him. He wanted the truth, so he came undercover. Now, Marcus Hale, a top-selling salesperson, looked at him with suspicion and disdain. Around them, customers glanced over some curious, others dismissive. The insult wasn't just about him, it was about every person who had ever been judged by appearance before being given a chance. Jamal felt an old fire rise in him. This was no longer about observation. This was the start of a reckoning. Jamal Thompson's rise had been anything but easy. Born in a cramped apartment in Detroit's East Side, he was the youngest of three, raised by a mother who worked double shifts at a diner and a father who disappeared before his 10th birthday. He remembered the sting of being followed in department stores, the way clerks hovered, as if waiting for him to slip something into his pocket. At 17, he was once thrown out of a jewelry shop simply for asking about a watch. That humiliation had branded itself into his memory. Those memories became fuel. He started as a street vendor selling handmade bracelets, learning the craft from an elderly neighbor. Every sale was a victory, every returning customer proof that his work had value. Slowly, the bracelets became rings, then necklaces, then bespoke pieces that caught the eyes of celebrities. Lumina Jewelry was born not just to make profit, but to create a space where everyone, no matter their skin color or clothes, felt respected. Yet now, in his own flagship store, the old poison had seeped back in. He had built a sanctuary, and prejudice had walked through the front door wearing a smile and a sales badge. Part of him wanted to walk away to let Marcus Hale's words roll off his back. After all, CEOs didn't need to prove themselves to sales staff. But another part, the 17-year-old still standing outside that jewelry shop, fists clenched, knew silence would make him complicit. He took a slow breath, the kind he used before boardroom battles. If Lumina's walls had allowed this kind of rot, he would have to tear it out himself brick by brick. This time, he wouldn't be silent. Jamal stepped deeper into the flagship store, the quiet chime of the door fading behind him. The space was bathed in cool white light, the air carrying the faint scent of polished mahogany and expensive perfume. Glass cases gleamed, each one holding pieces worth more than what his mother earned in a year. Normally, this was his kingdom. Today, it felt like hostile territory. Marcus Hale's eyes tracked him like a hawk, every step scrutinized. Jamal kept his movements slow, deliberate, pretending to browse the diamond engagement rings. He could feel Marcus inching closer, his cologne cutting through the air like an intrusion. "Can I help you with something?" Marcus asked, his tone heavy with suspicion rather than service. "I'm just looking," Jamal replied calmly. Marcus gave a tight, humorless smile. "Well, some of these are a little out of range for most casual visitors." Jamal let the comment hang in the air, saying nothing. He reached for a brochure, flipping through it as though he had all the time in the world. From across the store, an employee whispered to another. Jamal didn't need to hear the words. The quick glances and smirks were enough. His phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "You've got Marcus on duty. He's got a reputation, be careful." "Noted," Jamal typed back, sliding the phone into his pocket. Marcus stepped closer. "We've had issues lately with people hanging around and not buying. Management doesn't really like loitering. You understand." The irony nearly made Jamal laugh. Management was him, but he stayed in character. "I'll keep that in mind," he said evenly. Marcus tilted his head toward the display case. "If you're serious, I can show you a few pieces. But if not," he gestured vaguely toward the door. Jamal met his gaze for the first time. "I'd like to see what you've got," he said. Marcus smirked. "All right, then. Prove you can afford this, or we might be wasting each other's time." The words landed like a slap. Around them, two customers slowed their browsing to watch. One woman clutched her purse tighter. Jamal kept his voice level. "I'll take my time." Marcus's eyes narrowed as if he were measuring every syllable. "Sure, but don't touch anything without asking." Jamal's grip tightened on the brochure, but he forced his shoulders to relax. This was exactly why he had come to see the truth when no one knew who he was. Now that truth was unfolding in front of him, ugly and unfiltered. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he felt the pull to end the charade, to flash his credentials, and watch Marcus's smugness dissolve. But no, there was more to see, more to learn. If this was a battlefield, he needed to let the enemy reveal every weapon first. Word travels fast in closed spaces, faster still when it carries the sour scent of prejudice. Within minutes, Jamal could feel the shift. The soft hum of polite chatter between staff gave way to stifled laughter, sideways glances, and that unmistakable silence when you become the subject of the room. Marcus didn't just watch him, he orchestrated the atmosphere. He leaned toward another salesperson, muttering something that drew a chuckle. A moment later, the whispers multiplied like ripples in water. Jamal moved toward another case, this one holding emerald-cut diamonds. His reflection in the glass stared back at him. Hoodie jeans, unshaven jawline. He knew exactly what they saw. Not a CEO, not a man who'd spent 20 years perfecting his craft. Just another black man hanging around in a store where the cheapest item cost more than a month's rent. He took out his phone, tapping a quick text to Elena. "It's worse than I thought. Customers are noticing too." Her reply came instantly. "Want me to come in?" "Not yet," he wrote. "I need to see where this goes." A middle-aged couple wandered near him, looking at bracelets. The woman's eyes flitted toward him, then away. The man subtly shifted so he was between her and Jamal. No words. Just instinct, the kind born from 1,000 social cues. Marcus seized the moment, strolling over. "Sir, I notice you've been walking around for quite a while," he said, voice raised just enough for others to hear. "If you're not ready to make a purchase, we might need to free up the space for other customers." Jamal met his gaze, keeping his own tone measured. "I wasn't aware there was a time limit." Marcus's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We just want to make sure the store is comfortable for everyone." The word everyone landed heavy. Before Jamal could reply, Marcus took a casual step forward, accidentally brushing against him with his shoulder. The contact was light, but deliberate, an animal's way of marking territory. Coffee from Marcus's paper cup sloshed over the rim, splattering onto Jamal's hoodie. "Oh, sorry about that," Marcus said, his apology as hollow as the grin on his face. Jamal dabbed at the spot with a napkin from his pocket, the bitter smell of burnt espresso rising into the air. He could feel the eyes on him, the unspoken narrative forming in their minds. That was when security arrived. Two uniformed guards emerged from the back, scanning the room before settling on Jamal. "Sir, we've had a report of suspicious behavior," one of them said. Jamal raised an eyebrow. Suspicious behavior. Marcus stood behind them, arms folded, wearing the smug satisfaction of someone who thinks he's already won. The guard's stance was neutral, but Jamal could sense the edge hands resting too close to the radio posture tilted forward. This wasn't curiosity. This was preparation. "I'm just looking," Jamal replied evenly. "Mind showing us some ID?" the second guard asked. Jamal's pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. The moment felt all too familiar. Echoes of a younger version of himself stopped and questioned for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He reached for his wallet, feeling the weight of the CEO badge inside, knowing he could end this charade in seconds. But another voice in his mind, cool, strategic, told him to wait. His phone buzzed again. "Elena, this is getting out of hand. I'm on my way." For the first time, Jamal let his eyes drop, exhaling slowly. He wasn't just fighting Marcus now. He was fighting the story Marcus had already set in motion, a story the crowd was ready to believe. Marcus didn't waste time. With the smug efficiency of someone who had done this before he stepped aside, phone already in hand. Jamal caught the words possible theft and needs immediate response, drifting toward the guards. It was a performance calculated deliberate. The audience was the shoppers lingering nearby, their curiosity sharpened by the scent of scandal. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the muted elegance of the store. Red and blue lights flashed against the glass display cases, turning shimmering diamonds into fractured prisms of chaos. Shadow's bark echoed from outside, sharp and anxious, the leash tugging against the lamppost. The officers came in fast, their presence heavy, their questions clipped. "Sir, step over here," one commanded. Jamal opened his mouth to explain, but Marcus was faster. "That's him, been loitering, acting suspicious, casing the displays for the past 20 minutes. I saw him trying to get close to the rear case." "That's not true," Jamal said evenly. "Let's verify that downtown," the officer replied, already reaching for his wrist. Cold metal clamped around him, handcuffs tight enough to bite into his skin. Murmurs rippled through the store. Someone raised a phone to film. Another customer gasped. To them, this was entertainment. To Jamal, it was a familiar humiliation, wearing a new suit. "Check my wallet," he told them. "My ID is in there." The officer glanced at Marcus, who shrugged. "He's stalling." They ignored his words, guiding him toward the door. Shadow barked louder, straining against the leash as Jamal emerged into the sunlight, cuffs catching the light. He caught sight of his reflection in the glass door, head slightly bowed, wrists bound, surrounded by uniforms. Not a CEO, not a leader, just another man in chains. Inside, Marcus lingered near the entrance, his arms crossed, that same self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. The officers placed Jamal beside the patrol car. Questions fired in rapid succession. Where was he earlier today? Did he know anyone in the store? What was he planning to buy? "I came to look at rings." Jamal answered, his voice calm but clipped. "Sure you did," one muttered. Shadow whined his nose, pushing against Jamal's leg as if to reassure him. People gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the flashing lights. A few whispered, some recorded. One man pointed at Jamal and said, knew something was off about him. The comment slid under Jamal's skin, but he didn't react. The game Marcus had set in motion was working exactly as intended. "Put him in the car," the senior officer ordered. Jamal felt the grip tighten on his arm when a sudden voice cut through the tension, sharp, commanding, and familiar. "Stop! Right now!" It was Elena. She strode toward them, heels striking the pavement like gavel blows. In one hand, she held a black leather portfolio. In the other, her phone camera still recording. "That man is Jamal Thompson," she announced. "CEO of Lumina Jewelry. You're making a very big mistake." The crowd's murmurs shifted, confusion mixing with disbelief. The officers hesitated. Marcus's smirk faltered for the first time. Elena didn't slow down. She marched straight past the stunned customers and the stiff-backed guards, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Release him," she said to the senior officer. "Now." "Ma'am!" The officer began. But she was already opening the leather portfolio. Inside was a neatly laminated sheet, Jamal's corporate credentials, complete with his photograph and the gold-embossed seal of Lumina Jewelry. She held it up like a badge of honor. "This is your suspect. He owns this store. He owns this entire company." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones that had been recording for curiosity's sake now captured something entirely different, the unmasking of a lie. Marcus took a step forward. He wasn't acting like what Elena snapped. Like a man you judged before speaking to. Like a customer who didn't fit your mental picture of who belongs here. Her words struck like hammer blows. Marcus's face reddened, but he stayed silent. Elena turned to the officers. "You've humiliated an innocent man in front of dozens of witnesses. And lucky for us, we have more than witnesses. From her phone, she pulled up a video feed, the store's own security camera footage. She pressed play. The crowd leaned closer as the truth unspooled on the tiny screen, Marcus shadowing Jamal, whispering to other employees, deliberately bumping into him, spilling coffee on his clothes. Every frame was time-stamped, undeniable. A murmur built into something louder. Someone in the back said, "That's messed up." Another voice, "I'm posting this." The officers exchanged a glance. The senior one stepped forward and unlocked the cuffs. "Sir, Mr. Thompson, save it," Jamal said quietly, rubbing his wrists. He didn't look at the officers. He didn't even look at Marcus. His eyes found Shadow, who wagged his tail cautiously, as if sensing the shift in the air. "Let's go," Jamal told Elena. But the crowd wasn't ready to let it end there. Someone shouted, "We're with you, man!" Another yelled shame on him and pointed straight at Marcus. Within minutes, the scene began spilling onto social media. Short clips with captions like "CEO arrested in his own store" and "racial profiling caught on camera" multiplied online. The hashtag Justice for Jamal was already gaining traction before they reached the sidewalk. As they walked away, Elena leaned closer. "You want me to handle this quietly?" Jamal's jaw tightened. "No. This time the world needs to see." The sun was dipping lower now, casting long shadows across the pavement. Jamal glanced once over his shoulder, not at Marcus, not at the store, but at the small crowd still gathered their phones, still raised their voices, still buzzing with outrage. The truth had been exposed, but this fight was far from over. By the time Jamal reached his office later that evening, the internet was already doing what it does best, digging. The video of his arrest had exploded across platforms, shared not just by strangers, but by influential voices in business, civil rights, and entertainment. Each repost carried a sharper edge, calling for accountability not just for Marcus, but for Lumina Jewelry itself. Elena was at his desk, her laptop open to a flood of notifications. "You need to see this," she said. On the screen was a private message from a current employee, anonymous but credible. It read, "Marcus has done this before. He's run off customers because of how they looked. Complaints were ignored." Jamal leaned forward. "How many?" Elena's fingers flew over the keys, pulling up more messages. "At least 7 former staff have stories. They say he targets minorities. Some even claim he brags about it in the break room." The more they read, the darker it became. A leaked email surfaced Marcus writing to a fellow employee about a certain type of customer who never buys, only steals. He never named race outright, but the language dripped with implication. Jamal felt the old ache in his chest, the one that came from knowing prejudice wasn't always shouted, it was often whispered, coded, hidden in plain sight. By midnight, the media had picked it up. Headlines ranged from CEO arrested in his own store to racial profiling in luxury retail. Commentators were dissecting the footage, pausing frames to highlight Marcus's smirk the moment he spilled coffee, the instant he made the call to the police. Elena closed her laptop and looked at him. "What's your move?" Jamal thought of the young sales associates who had quietly endured Marcus's behavior, afraid to speak out. He thought of the customers who had been turned away without the world ever knowing. This wasn't just about him anymore. "We start from the ground up," he said. "No more silence. I want every story, every complaint documented. And I want a press statement today." The next morning, Lumina Jewelry released a public apology signed by Jamal himself. It acknowledged systemic failures in oversight, promised a full investigation, and most importantly, invited employees past and present to share their experiences without fear of retaliation. The floodgates opened. Testimony after testimony rolled in accounts of Marcus mocking accents, questioning customers' ability to pay, shadowing them through the store. Others revealed he had allies, people who laughed at his jokes, looked the other way, or dismissed the complaints as misunderstandings. The court of public opinion shifted. The narrative was no longer about whether Jamal was telling the truth. It was about how such behavior had been allowed to fester in a brand built on the promise of inclusivity. By week's end, Marcus's employment was terminated. A statement from the board confirmed he would never work for Lumina again. But Jamal knew this wasn't the end. The rot had been deeper than one man. He stood in the flagship store days later, the same spot where Marcus had confronted him. The air felt different, cooler, quieter, but the echoes of that afternoon still clung to the walls. "This place will change," he said under his breath, almost to himself, "or it won't stand at all." Marcus was gone. The press cycle had moved from outrage to analysis then to the next scandal. On paper, Jamal had won. His name was cleared. The board publicly backed him, and Lumina Jewelry's leadership vowed to overhaul hiring and training practices. But the victory didn't feel like a win. The days after the incident blurred together. Interviews, statements, meetings with legal teams. Each retelling reopened the wound. Each replay of the video reminded him not of triumph, but of the cold metal biting his wrists. The suspicious eyes that had accepted Marcus's story without question. His anonymity was gone. Trips to the grocery store or walks with Shadow now carried the risk of recognition. Some strangers offered quiet nods of respect. Others whispered as he passed, their eyes flicking over him, as if measuring the man against the headlines. The stress carved itself into his body. Sleep became shallow, interrupted by dreams of flashing lights and raised voices. His doctor warned him about his blood pressure. Even Shadow seemed more alert on their walks, his ears twitching at sudden noises. The store had been cleansed of Marcus, but Jamal knew prejudice wasn't confined to one man. It lived in unspoken policies, in unchecked biases, in the space between suspicion and courtesy. That truth weighed heavier than any single confrontation. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Jamal stood in his backyard, Shadow at his side. He thought about the young version of himself who once dreamed of a store where everyone was welcome. That dream had survived, but it had scars now. Winning, he realized, wasn't always about feeling victorious. Sometimes it was about refusing to be erased, no matter the cost.